So, Hope and I met, as we said just a few seconds ago. We met a week or so ago, and we had an absolutely amazing introductory call. Um, and on the back of that, we thought we've got lots to share here. We've got ideas, we've got thoughts, we have our own backgrounds. So we thought, let's put on a LinkedIn Live. It was something that neither of us had ever done. Um, and I started by setting up an event and then realized hadn't got the technology, hadn't got the experience. And Hope said she was going to do it because Hope's background from her childhood is full of resilience and overcoming problems. Isn't that right, Hope?
Yes, we did.
So tell us about your journey and what got you here today.
Absolutely. Hey, Mark, before I start to share my journey, I would love to lay the land for our participants, knowing that we're probably going to spend time on three parts. The first part would be Mark and I each will share our early experiences, how that shaped what we're doing. And then that would lead to the second part, what we have been doing for the past how many years together, probably 100 years life experience. And then the third part, we would love to share where we are today and what we would love all of us to take away to do something about a very important critical topic that I hope that you are as passionate about as Mark and myself, which is gender equity. First, I would like to share some early experience of myself. The fact that I am here talking to you is a miracle. The fact that I was born is a miracle. The reason I'm saying that is my parents lost their job during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which is 10 years span from 1966 to 1976. If they didn't lose their jobs, they would have at most three children. And I'm child number four. So that's why it's a miracle. Because they lost their job, they were sent to the rural area to be quote unquote re educated. They were working in the field. The environments were really harsh. So I was born in a small village in China, rural area. The living condition was really bad, and we didn't have enough material, including food, clothing. I remember the only time I have new clothing, Mark, is during the Chinese New Year. That's a date that I would be looking forward to because I know I was going to have a new set of clothing instead of the passed down from my older siblings. And I also remember seeing my mom crying very regularly about what she is going to put food onto the table, what clothing that she can afford to the children. And when my older siblings went to college, do they have enough money to support them for college education? The other miracle that I was here to be able to travel around the world or the other half of the globe. I almost lost my mom. This is the story that my mom retold to me when I was 2 years old. My mom was walking around a well in the village. That's normally when people choose to end their life because the well is so deep. But she didn't do it because I was 2 years old. She thought, what I would be, what would I survive if she took her own life? And so that's the foundation of my childhood. Probably it also taught me things can be really bad, but it will be okay. Look at me, Mark. I'm okay. I built a family, I built a career. So
So
that's
that's
how I started.
Hope. That's an amazing childhood, but the gap between there and where you are now. this successful woman living and working on the west coast of America. What? Tell me the rest of the story. How did you how did you move? How did you get from where you are today to where you are from where you were?
Mark, thank you for doing that. I don't want to use all the time, but in summary, I went to a top university in China, in Beijing, studied aerospace engineering. I was top number one through my college years, and got a free entry to grad school. And then after that, I worked as a mechanical engineer in Beijing, and then immigrated to the US, studied in the Ohio State University for my master degree, and then found a job. I fall in love the America. The reason I'm saying that is every time you hear the anthem, it's really truly a land of freedom and dream, and for the people who have dreams. If you dream, you can fulfill that dream, which is really for me. In the beginning, I was just looking for a better living condition, a better career, and until throughout my career, from a developer, a software engineer, all the way to executive director, to SVP for two 400 Fortune 200 companies. I would not have imagined that would happen to me, but every time I was able to step up or expand my horizon, my dream becomes bigger. So a month ago, Mark, I quote quote retired from my corporate job. Now I'm running my own coaching and speaking business specifically for women in tech. So going back to how I started in a small village, the culture then value boys more than girls. So if you look at the Western country for adoption, you probably see more girls were adopted from China than boys. And also the engineering field, the college, as well as the field that I worked in, is all male dominated field. So I feel more and more attracted to, pulled to do something about gender equity. And so that's where I was, and that's where I am now, Mark. So I have shared enough of myself, Mark. Now I would like to hear your story. Your story was fascinating when we were first talking.
Thank you, and Hope. I think I mean your story is tough. It's full of really big challenges, but and when I tell my story, it kind of humbles me to think about the challenges that you came up against. But when I talk to people who are really motivated by gender equality and diversity and inclusion, there's normally something that's lit a fire in their belly, something that makes them passionate about this. It's not, they're not doing it just because it's the right thing or because there's a business case. There's some other big motivation. And when I look back on my life, I can see points in my life where things happened or I had experiences that have lit my fire. And that started like you. It started right back off in childhood, and there were two main aspects there. One was my parents. So I was born in 1960, so I'm 64, um, and that was a different time, a different age. But my parents had a very inclusive home life. I had a very inclusive home. I was just as likely to see my father doing the washing and the ironing and the cooking as my mother. My father was just as likely to care for me if I was sick as my mother. But my mother also, as soon as she could and as soon as it was socially acceptable to do so, returned to her career. So I had this wonderful home. Um, but my school life was not so wonderful. Um, I'm dyslexic, like my father and like my son. Um, uh, so I failed miserably at school because teachers taught in one way. It was writing on blackboards and pupils copying into exercise books. I had no hope of keeping up with the teacher or either taking anything in when I was forced to learn in that way. So I have to admit, I left school and since then have taken a few exams, but I've failed them all miserably. Um, and uh, so I left school. I got a job in a local manufacturing company as a post room boy, delivering the post and the internal mail around the organization. And the first thing I saw when I got to work was there was this sudden division of labor. And there were three divisions of labor. There were the gender split. There were women and ordinary men. The women were in the typing pool in the switchboard. The men were doing drafting and important work. But then there was as a post room boy, I was able to climb the stairs. And I climbed the stairs to meet the management, the directors, the senior leadership team. And none of them looked like me. I couldn't relate to any of them. They had all had very different upbringings to me. And I very quickly decided that if I was going to succeed, I needed to start looking like them, behaving like them, sounding like them, adopting their ways. So I took my earring out, I got my hair cut, I brought a suit, a white shirt and a tie, and I got some black shoes, which I cleaned every morning. And I started to progress in my career. I think that's where my passion for this really came from. And it wasn't until 25 years ago, so about 15, 20 years into my career, where I started to think about these things, where I started to think about equality, inclusion, and whether the world and culture and behaviors in workplaces needed changing a little bit.
Yeah. So, Mark, I think what I heard is probably many years of struggle when you are not doing so well in the school. You probably, I don't know whether anybody else called you or not. Maybe at least yourself will feel why I am so stupid, so dumb. Why can't I be like somebody else, pick up and comprehends the comprehend whatever the teacher was teaching? How would
Yeah,
that look like?
I think that's interesting because it's I spent many over half my life, probably well over half my life, hiding my dyslexia. I had to hide it, but I knew I had a superpower. I knew I had a dyslexic superpower. It was just finding the places to use that power, finding the opportunity to use it, and that came actually early in my career when I moved and got a job in sales and found that I was a good salesman, which is because I think because of a lot of my diversity characteristics. And it was at that point my career started to take off. But it's still, with my dyslexia, it's still not without its challenges. But in this inclusive world that we live in now, I'm dyslexic. I can say it. I can shout it. It's I look at it now as a superpower, not as some kind of thing that holds me back,
That's
which I think is really
amazing.
important. Yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing. I think for me, because I grew up in a culture or maybe education, often is black or white, right? We try to put people into boxes.
yeah,
So for me, it was a learning curve. It's a journey. It's unlearn something that I don't believe is correct anymore. For example, I probably would be among the group of people who laughed at some other students who couldn't get it right when I
yeah,
was a little child. I think we're all innocent. We were conditioned by our society.
Yeah, yeah.
But now I know better. I know that we're all different. We're all powerful. Like you said, you have your unique superpower. That's so important.
Indeed, indeed. So that, does that bring us kind of up to where we are in our careers now, and perhaps, or we need to share what we're doing now? You're doing some great work, as you say. You've just started with Blueprint Coaching. Um, what is what's the motivation for that? What are you doing? What do you?
Awesome, Mark. Thank you for keeping us in the on schedule. So for me, I think once I step up into leadership position, I realized that just like you put on a suit and tie and black shoes and trying to look like somebody, trying to look at those managers or leaders or executives. Um, I did the same thing, right? How leaders look like, feel like. Maybe in the corporate world, we value people who are more assertive, who knows the answer, who can make a decision quickly. Certainly, I did that in my early stage of my leadership. But more and more, I found my leadership style is actually sometimes different than others, which because of my background as a female, as a single mother, as a Asian woman, as a woman of color, all the nuances of my experiences made me really think about other people, to be passionate, to be empathetic. So I think about what kind of decision I make, how that decision maybe impact other people. Especially more and more, I found myself to pay attention on the gender equity. Like I mentioned, in the technology, it's still very male dominated field. So when I look at the senior leadership, often I see very less women, myself included, often is the only woman in the table, at the table in the room, or the only person of color in the room. And so once you see something, you cannot unsee.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, Mark, whether you have such realization or not. So that's when I see more and more, I say, I want to do something about it. So I start to be more involved in the company's DEI work, leading the Women in Technology group in the global company, and becoming mentors and coaches to other people. And now I got to do that full time, which is a privilege.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I think there's something, as you say, we talked about our early life. There's something then that has motivated us to do what we're doing now. I think my real motivation came when I left my last real job 25 years ago, working in the city in financial services in London. Um, and I decided to set up by myself and do something. Um, that business started to grow, and it was more than I could cope with. So I knew I needed to recruit people, and but I needed people with financial services experience. I needed people that had worked for Goldman Sachs, for J.P. Morgan, for Fidelity. Um, but I knew I couldn't compete with them on salary, and and suddenly I I was at the school gates. I was at the side of the sports field, and I started talking to these amazing women who had been let go from their careers by Goldman Sachs, by JP Morgan, by Morgan Stanley, by Fidelity, UBS, Credit Suisse, because they'd become mothers, and therefore they were no longer necessarily useful to those organizations, or those organizations didn't see them as being useful 25 years ago. But those women, to me, they were the most amazing, powerful, motivated individuals that sometimes I'd met in my life. And I thought, actually, what do they want? All they want is some flexible working. an employer that understands about little Johnny being sick and the school sports day and the nativity play and school holidays, well, I can become that employer. I want to become that employer because that's kind of what I want as well. So I started hiring these, and the business grew and grew. But as it grew, I started to really understand more about those women's lived experiences, not just whilst they were with me and that challenge of work-life balance, but the challenges that they'd had in the workplace before that. And then they started to return to work after, or sorry, return to their full-time careers. Maybe, their children had started school or gone to senior school or something else had happened in their lives, and they wanted to return to this amazing career in the city. And I started to look and speak to them about what was happening to them when they did that. And I realized there was this huge, great, big lived experience gap, this gap between the female lived experience and the male lived experience in the workplace. And I started to then become really passionate, really, really passionate about gender equality, and started, one, supporting and helping a wider group of women, but two, getting to the forefront of gender equality within financial services in the UK and globally. And we'd done some amazing work with that. But then, having done that for a few years and started to look at all of the illustrations about how far we were progressing. In the UK, we've got gender pay gap stats, we've got the women in finance charter stats, etc., etc. And what I was seeing is, despite all of the noise, the commitments, the work that people were doing, not much was happening. In fact, the representation of women at senior roles within financial services, which is huge, a huge gap between the number of men and women, was closing at 1% per year, which meant it would be another 30 odd years in many cases before we got anywhere near gender equality. And I thought, well, we need to stop that. We need to change that. We need to accelerate change. And I also realized at that point that quite often when we were talking about this subject, I was the only man in the room. Yeah. And when I started talking to other men about this, a lot of them have said, oh, yeah, that D&I stuff, not about me, or that D&I stuff is against me. And you kind of feel, actually, there's another opportunity here. Let's look at this problem through the other lens. Let's look at this problem through the male lens, and let's get men passionate and engaged in DE&I. So that's where I am today. Really spending a lot of my time, or the vast majority of my time, working with firms to help them engage their male colleagues, their leaders, and other people, men and women, up and down the organization to drive cultural change.
Mark, what you shared is so amazing and touching, because you're right. Many people may not fully understand what women are living through their motherhood, their elder care at home, and a full-time job. So flexibility is absolutely something that we can support our female workforce. On the other hand, I think for a leader in the organization, it's everyone's responsibility to think about, how can I support everyone in my team, not just the high performing or the star performers. How can I make the life easier? How can I support them to excel with their current situation? And even just having a conversation like that, instead of DI has nothing to do with me because I'm a white male, or I'm a male in general, gender equity has nothing to do with me. And I often found that when I talk to men, especially in the workplace, I haven't really seen anyone saying, well, I don't like women, because those people will not certainly
Say that.
become
Yeah.
great leaders, right?
Yeah.
But it's the macro aggression.
Good
When I
stuff.
say macroaggression, they could say, hey, because they're becoming a mother, so they can't take on big projects. How do you know? I was a single mother, but I was responsible for a global initiative, right?
Yeah.
Because we women are as driven, as motivated as men, if not more. And so it's very important for us to have the allies. And I'm fortunate in my life, I have so many men as my ally, my sponsor. And right now, Mark, you're actually my allies, right? We
Yeah.
work together to share our experiences on this gender equity front. So you talked about financial industry, the female and male, the discrepancy on senior leadership. McKinsey and Lin Yin just published their 10th Women in the Workforce. That's a collection of many different industries. Overall, we know it's going to take another 50 years for gender equity. So,
Yeah.
for those parents who have maybe both girls and boys, would you like your daughter to be to be paid less, to be
Yeah. Yeah.
less visible at work, and they're assigned to be less important projects? You certainly would not say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
But
that's
I
why.
think it's and Hope. I think from our research and our stats, which were done started at Cambridge University in the UK. It's not just that paid less. Um, it's, do you want your daughter to be interrupted more than your son in the workplace? Do you want your daughter to be given the admin tasks and pointed in that direction rather than the P&L tasks? Do you want your daughter to be left out of social interactions because she's a girl or a woman? Um, um, do you want, when you become a grandparent, for her career to come to a full stop? And I think we say no to all of those things. We don't want those things to happen, but actually then we don't do anything to change them. And we talk about allies. I think there's two types of ally. There's that ally who will coach, mentor, and train you to speak up in meetings so you don't get interrupted. So they'll train, coach, and mentor you to behave like a man. Yeah. And I don't think I think it's appropriate sometimes, but actually I'd prefer an inclusion ally who changes the way the meeting is run. Yeah.
Say more. I love that.
We've got to change the way the meeting is run. Yeah. It's no good expecting and getting a diverse workforce and then training and coaching and mentoring them to all behave like the majority, because you don't get the benefits of diversity and inclusion if you do that. So let's change the culture, let's change the behaviors. And by the way, when we do, and recognizing we've got about 30 seconds left, when we do, the world improves for men as well. Yeah. Men have got, it's not a win-loss for men, it's a win-win. Men, in an inclusive world, can free themselves from complying with outdated male stereotypes. And with that, they can increase their opportunities, increase their choices in life, have better mental health outcomes, reduce male suicides, be the type of father they want to be the type of husband they want to be the type of leader they really want to be. And as leaders have got there on merit and know they've got there on merit, and run then an inclusive workforce is a lot easier than being the boss. Going back to my early days in work when I met these men who were bosses. They were called bosses because that's what they did.
Yeah, I love that, Mark.
Yeah, yeah,
It's truly, we create a psychological safety environment that everybody can be themselves. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we'll stop personal development. We won't. We always want to be better, be a better leader, be a better contributor, be a better team member, parent, all of that.
Yeah.
But the environment we're running, how do we do performance review? All of that contribute to the gender equity.
Yeah.
Maybe we summarize by having a call to action for our participants. What would you say, Mark?
And I'm just looking at the people on the call here as much as I can see. I think my call to action is really we need to start accelerating this. We've been talking about it, and therefore we need to focus on inclusion. Diversity has got us so far, but inclusion for me is the great unlock. Yeah. Look for an inclusion ally. Let's start changing the culture. Let's stop talking about diversity, which can cause gender conflict or ethnic conflict. We're all in this together and we can all win together. So let's do it together.
I love that, Mark. My suggestion would be, because sometimes when we talk about gender equity, it can be seen as crying babies, right?
Yeah.
But if a man, an inclusive leader, talking about this, I think the power could be more. So if everybody, and not just men, if they can become public allies, which means they during the meeting they could say, "Hey, Amy, what do you think?"
Yes.
If they saw someone is saying anything, doing anything that discriminate, they can call other people out. We need that kind of allies.
Yeah. 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 I think, and my last point on that though is I speak to a lot of men who say, I'm an ally. And then you ask them what they've done. And they say, I met this really talented woman who I opened a lot of doors for. To me, that's his day job. Yeah. He met a talented person. He wouldn't get a medal for it if it was a man. Yeah. That should be what he does every day of his life. It's part of the role. It's part of leadership. Yeah. What leaders need to be doing is doing that, but also then thinking about, okay, how do we create this culture that changes the world, that changes the workplace so everybody can succeed, everybody can flourish, and everybody gets more choice and opportunity, and we get a better workplace as a result.
I think we cannot end any better than what you said, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Hope it's lovely. We should do this again.
I think so. See
Yeah.
you again. Bye.
See you
Thank you
again.
for coming.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.